Good morning and a very warm welcome from Cape Town, and a warm welcome to every participant from South Africa, Namibia, Botswana and Germany. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the SA German Chamber of Commerce to our today's market information session on stimulating resource efficiency in the industry in Southern Africa. I'm going to be the host today. And gonna announce the speakers, and I'm gonna do a wrap up. I'm also gonna give a little presentation on the project we're actually representing today. But before we start, we have still participants coming into the room. Nonetheless, we want to start in time because we have a full program, an interesting program, and a few comments before we start. Just to take note that it's possible today to listen to this session either in English or German. So we have interpreters, Stephanie and Chris, doing the translation. And if you want to activate the translation function, you all should have a little globe symbol on the bottom of your screen, on the bottom right, where you can change the channels to either listen to the presentations and to the talk in English and German. Also, please note, we're going to record the session and also going to share then the recording with every registered participants. We're also going to share all the presentations that will be shown today. So the information will be provided. And please also note that we have for the participants disabled the function, the camera and microphone function. If you want to engage with us, if you want to leave comments or raise a question, you're more than welcome to use the chat function. My colleague Vera and I, we will take a close look at the chat and make sure that we will address any comments and questions relevant to today's session. With having said this, I would like to hand over to the Deputy CEO of the SA German Chamber of Commerce, Bastian Litzper, to give a word of welcome to today's event. Bastian.
Yeah, thank you, Jens. Final technical check. I'm visible. You can hear me. Excellent. Good. Then let's get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bastian Litzper, and I'm the Deputy CEO at the Southern African German Chamber of Commerce and Industry. As of this morning, the world is filled with the news about Russia and Ukraine, but if you allow me, I would like to focus on our topic today, which is attempting to make the world a better place for everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the project and market information session, Stimulating Sustainable Resource Use in Industry in South Africa, Namibia and Botswana. The topic of sustainable resource use is critical in times when our consumption of non-renewable and renewable natural resources exceeds what our planet can provide. Testament to the great interest in this topic is the wide variety of sectors and disciplines from Germany and Southern Africa who are here today, including the water sector, government, financing institutions, chambers of commerce and industry, educational and research entities, and other industry sectors and associations represented by mining and mineral processing, food processing, manufacturing, medical and cosmetic, and the chemical sector, among others. This event is hosted by the Southern African German Chamber of Commerce and Industry and is supported by the initiative Environmental Protection Made in Germany, a program of the German Ministry of Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Security, and Consumer Protection. This event forms part of a one-year project which aims to assist selected industry participants to develop concrete and replicable resource efficiency projects. The focus will be on the exploration of environmental technology solutions to solve water efficiency, wastewater management, and waste minimization challenges in South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana. We are most grateful to the experts and industry representatives who have contributed towards shaping the program of the project and today's event. We also thank our local and German collaboration partners for sharing our invitations to the session with their stakeholders. Herewith, I would like to introduce Ms. Charlotte Dieter from the German Ministry of Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Security, and Consumer Protection. She represents Environmental Protection Made in Germany today. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lipser. I will continue in German. I hope everybody can listen to me and choose his or her language. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, lieber Herr Litzer, lieber Herr Hauser, liebe Frau Massie, liebe Anwesende. Herzlichen Dank für die freundliche Einführung und lassen Sie mich vorweg schicken, auch wir sind hier in Deutschland zutiefst besorgt über die Geschehnisse, die uns heute Morgen aus der Ukraine erreichen. Bundeskanzler Scholz hat es, glaube ich, ganz gut in Worte gefasst. Das ist ein furchtbarer Tag für die Ukraine und ein sehr dunkler Tag für Europa. Ich denke, an einem solchen Tag muss man das leider auch ansprechen. Wir alle, auch hier in Berlin, harren jetzt der Ereignisse und sind natürlich auch parallel hier immer am Schauen, wie die Entwicklung ist. Aber wie Herr Lipser schon sagte, heute soll es ja um unser gemeinsames Projekt gehen. Und an dieser Stelle möchte ich Sie auch im Namen des deutschen Bundesumweltministeriums ganz herzlich zu dieser Informationsveranstaltung, zu einem sehr wichtigen und auch aktuellen Thema begrüßen. Und zwar ein Thema, das nicht nur das südliche Afrika betrifft. Es ist die Fragestellung, wie wir eine nachhaltige, umweltgerechte und auch zukunftsfeste Nutzung von Ressourcen in der Industrie umsetzen können und dann auch leben können.
Entschuldige, Frau Dieter, wir haben ein Problem mit der Übersetzungsfunktion. Man kann anscheinend die englische Version leider nicht hören. Stefanie? Ja? Es kommt, jetzt funktioniert es. Okay, it's working now. Okay, great. Entschuldigung, gerne können Sie weitermachen.
Kein Problem. Ich hoffe, es klappt jetzt und jeder kann mich hören. Geben Sie mir vielleicht noch mal ein kurzes Signal, ob alles klappt. Das scheint so. Dann mache ich mal weiter mit meiner Einführung zu diesem Informationsaustausch heute, der ein Teil sehr vielfältiger Projektaktivitäten der Exportinitiative Umwelttechnologien, kurz EXI, wie wir sie nennen, ist, die wir zusammen mit unseren Partnern von den Auslandshandelskammern, den Chambers for Green Tech und auch anderen durchführen. Die Länder des südlichen Afrikas sind kein Neuland für das Umweltförderprogramm. So haben wir zum Beispiel gemeinsam mit der AHK in Nigeria vor, einen digitalen Marktplatz für die Kreislaufwirtschaft in Lagos auf die Beine zu stellen oder in Angolas Hauptstadt Luanda eine Durchführbarkeitsstudie zur getrennten Wertstofferfassung zu erstellen, um die Rahmenbedingungen für die Nutzung ressourceneffizienter Technologien zu verbessern. Die Motivation des Förderprogramms ist es, effiziente und ressourcenschonende Technologien, Lösungen und Dienstleistungen aus Deutschland zu nutzen, um andernorts dazu beizutragen, bessere Umwelt- und Lebensbedingungen zu ermöglichen, Umweltstandards zu erhöhen und dieser Punkt ist mir besonders wichtig, Umweltwissen zu verbreiten. Meine Damen und Herren, in diesem Sinne bin ich überzeugt, dass das Thema der AHK Südliches Afrika und unserer Veranstaltung heute einen Nerv trifft. Mich und meine Kolleginnen und Kollegen interessiert an diesem Projekt besonders, inwieweit die regionalen Gegebenheiten in den 3 Regionen und Ländern sich unterscheiden, aber insbesondere auch, welche Synergien, welche Learnings entstehen können, um den Ressourcenverbrauch zu minimieren. Dabei ist der Blick auf die Analyse in den unterschiedlichen Sektoren, die Herr Lipser eingangs nannte, sicher sehr gewinnbringend. In diesem Sinne bedanke ich mich für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit und freue mich jetzt auf einen informativen Workshop zu diesem wichtigen Thema. Vielen Dank.
Frau Dieter, vielen, vielen Dank. So many thanks for the introduction to the program, to the overall program, and also to introduction of the activities of, I think the German Federal Ministry with the longest title of all the ministries, and I think with a lot of subjects, and that you now have introduced the general program, the Environmental Protection Made in Germany initiative. I would like to introduce our project in a few words, so that everyone is aware what we want to achieve, what we're trying to achieve, and how we want to do it with the partner countries in Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa. So let me quickly share my screen and give you a bit of insight in what the team of the SA German Chamber of Commerce would like to achieve, actually in cooperation with you, with industry partners in the three target countries. A few words also. I think a lot of participants, or many of the participants, might know us, but I want to give a few words about the SA German Chamber of Commerce and the project team before introducing the project, and then continuing into the information being provided on resource efficiency in Southern Africa. The SA German Chamber of Commerce, we're quite established, active in the region, of founded 70 years ago, and we have about 700 members. It's important to highlight that we, despite the fact that we're the official representation of German business and trade relations in Southern Africa on behalf of the German government, we're actually a bilateral chamber. So we not only have members from Germany, but actually, in fact, members from the whole SADC region in our chamber, being active members and participating in trade and economic development activities together with the chamber. That also means we're a regional chamber. We're not looking only at South Africa, but at the whole SADC region, also with a network of offices outside of South Africa and cooperation partners. And we are structured in competence centers, so we have dedicated colleagues working specifically on key sectors of the economy in Southern Africa or important issues. An example for the key sector is not only the competence center, climate and environment, but also our colleagues from the mining competence center, and related to special subjects and topics, our unit on training and vocational education. The project that we're actually talking about today and that we will continue to work on within the next 12 months is headed by the Competence Center Climate and Environment. And our particular focus is basically to support the shift to a low carbon economic development within Southern African region. And we have a special focus on climate friendly and resource efficient technology, in particular in the fields of energy, water and waste. And as a trade chamber, our dedicated focus is actually on working with the private sector, enabling the private sector to get active in the region, in the markets of the region with green technologies, and expand their business, introduce new technologies. We provide market analysis and market information for companies in Germany, but also in the region. We're supporting companies with their business activities. And we also take part and implement projects like the one we're talking about today that are geared towards market development so that companies can get active and contribute to a more sustainable economy. And as a matter of fact, as a trade chamber, we also always focus on industry cooperation, on networking, and also to represent the this private sector towards public institutions. The project we're working on is a project which is specifically aimed at private sector manufacturing industries in Southern Africa. And as the title said, stimulating sustainable resource use by industry, we want to illustrate and highlight the benefits of modern environmental technology, and we want to share information. But the benefits of resource efficient technology shall not only be with the project being transported by information sharing or providing examples and talking what could be possible. Our approach is actually, together with industry partners, produce and build replicable and scalable projects in the industry. So working projects where the use of, or let's say the benefits of environmental technology is proven and can be demonstrated on site and in the partner countries. So as I said, we're not doing this by ourselves with the project team, represented, for instance, later by my colleague Vera Massie, who will give a presentation, also Hartzenburg, one of our experts, who also will present. We're actually doing this, we intend to doing this together with industry partners. And the project is split in 3 phases. The webinar, the information session today, basically marks part of the end of the first phase, the identification and analysis phase, where we put great emphasis into taking a look at the current situation of resource, waste and water efficiency in industries, and to identify industry partners and participants to work together with us in a development phase. And this development phase is actually what I meant, that we want to create real projects and real impact. The development phase is around the innovation and project development workshop, where we not only want to provide and build knowledge on how to develop environmental friendly measures in industry, but actually the participants together with experts are encouraged and will work on developing resource efficient projects for their industry, so for their business, so that by the end of the development phase, we not only have transferred knowledge and skills, but really have created tangible projects in the industry that can lead to real impacts. We conclude the project by the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, with the so-called consolidation phase, where we gonna disseminate the results of the project to a wider audience in Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, and Germany, to basically encourage further activities in the field and to highlight potential, to highlight impacts, always with the vision or with the hope that we actually stimulate investment activities in environmental technologies, to at the end of the project to really can say that we have contributed to the reduction of resource consumption and waste generation in the 3 countries. And also, you know, to make basically this project or these pre-developed projects happening, the consolidation phase also then includes a facilitation or linkages of the projects of the industry participants with potential technology providers, and most of all financing providers, to realize these projects and create an investment flow. We're going to wrap up then with collecting lessons learned, and also try to, as a form of representation of the private sector, to actually channel the lessons from these projects into the policy debate and the bilateral cooperation of Germany with the 3 partner countries, Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa. As my colleague Bastian, our deputy CEO, has already said, the whole activity is possible. The whole project is actually possible due to the funding by the German Federal Ministry of Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety, and Consumer Protection. And we're really grateful that we have the opportunity to implement these projects under the umbrella of the German Initiative for Environmental Protection. With this having said, and before basically entering into the information session, so into the talk of my colleague Vera, giving an outlook on the current situation in the partner countries and the framework conditions, and then later Hartzenburg giving concrete examples, I would first of all like to thank for your interest and your participation today. And I would also like to do a little poll to take a look on the actual awareness regarding resource efficiency in industry in the Southern African region. So not only the awareness, or rather your perception. So it would be really kind of you participate in our poll. And you see the question now in front of your screen. I can read them out again, but I guess you already, I see people are already doing the live poll. So thank you very much. I see that some of the questions are not completely visible. So I'm going to read out the 4 questions quickly. The first question would be, many industries have already started to become more resource efficient. If you think this is the case, please poll for question 1. Question 2, industries are starting to become aware of ways in which to become resource efficient. Industries are unaware of opportunities is question 3. And quite interesting, at the moment, no vote for this. There are no opportunities in resource efficiency in industries. I'm actually quite glad that the audience is considering question 4 as not applicable, because we also believe that that there are opportunities, or we are pretty sure, having done the analysis. And with having said that, I would like to close the poll now and hand over to my colleague Vera Massie, who will exactly talk at the framework conditions for resource waste and water efficiency in industry. And I think we from these framework conditions, we will see that there in fact are opportunities. So I'm going to stop sharing the poll now. I'm going to share the results. We have an overwhelming vote that industries are becoming aware. I'm glad for this feedback. And like I said, I'm also glad that nobody considers that there are no opportunities. And having said that, I would like to hand over to my colleague Vera to give you the presentation on the framework conditions in Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa. Vera, please.
Good morning, everyone. Please hang in there while I share my presentation. Should be able to see my presentation now.
Slideshow.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, today I will be speaking to you about the market environment and opportunities for resource efficiency in South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana. I think we've had a very good introduction to the topic and what we are trying to achieve. So I'm here today to present to you the results of the studies that we compiled as part of phase 1 of the project. We compiled 2 studies, one on waste management, reuse and minimization, and the other one on water use efficiency and wastewater management. Those 2 studies can be downloaded under the publication tabs of the website link that I've just shared with you in the chat. So please feel free to download the information if you would like to learn more. I have half an hour to present on these 2 studies, so we really are focusing on the most important aspects, but there is a lot more information in these studies. So please do go and read the study if you find the time. So there is a strong need that we need to start decoupling our environmental resource use from economic growth, not just in Southern Africa, but in the world. We are focusing on the 3 countries today, on South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, and we would like to present to you what we found in our analyses with regards to how conducive the market is to effect change in industry with regards to resource efficiency. The 2 focus topics, as I mentioned already, are water and waste. We excluded renewable energy or energy efficiency as a topic on its own from our studies. However, we do consider energy efficiency if it is linked to waste consumption or reducing waste consumption, or to reduce water consumption. These topics can't be entirely separated. So we have included this topic in that regard. So I would like to present to you today, just very briefly touch on the reason why we are doing this project and why we need to move towards greater resource efficiency, and that is the state of our natural resources. Secondly, I would like to present to you the key drivers that we identified that form the framework of how conducive the environment is for industry to actually make that change. And then finally, I'll briefly touch on market opportunities for industries as well as the water and waste sector who are able to provide the technologies for the solutions that are required. I should probably also mention that on the note of market opportunities, Mr. Alfred Hartzenburg will also be presenting great more detail later on in our event. So very briefly, the state of our natural resources are dire currently, as we are all aware, I'm sure. Ecosystem degradation and associated loss of ecosystem services as a result of resource extraction and waste disposal is a serious problem in Southern Africa. So we've been experiencing water shortages in all three countries that we are considering today, and those are expected to worsen over time due to urbanization, demand centers, and demand exceeding supply, and due to climate change as well, of course. So South Africa, for example, also is running out of waste storage space, which is an important driver for change in South Africa. We are experiencing greater and greater water pollution, which also increases water treatment for those industries that rely on water resources. And we're also losing the loss of resources are also affecting the profitability of industries. So these examples just briefly demonstrate the importance of ecosystem services. That little graphic that I've included in the presentation, I don't want to go into greater detail because that's not the objective of our event today, to discuss ecosystem services, but nevertheless, I think it's important to be aware of that, and that, that industries do rely on ecosystem services that can only be provided by a healthy ecosystem. The key drivers of change, we've identified 5 key drivers in our studies that form the framework of effecting change. And when we say effect change in our event or in our presentation, we are focusing on environmental technologies that can be implemented. Environmental technologies are key to achieving better resource efficiency. So you will hear us mentioning environmental technologies a fair bit. So first, we have policy direction and institutions, which is usually an indicator of political will. We will also talk about the legislative changes or the current legislation that is implemented in these 3 countries and what we can expect in future, as well as economic incentives under which we would consider waste and wastewater discharge or disposal charges, other economic instruments such as tax incentives or disincentives, as well as input material costs such as water. Environmental factors are also important. So we, especially when it comes to the topic of water efficiency and water management, we speak about water shortages. With regards to managing waste, is input material shortages, and then also environmental disasters can be a severe impacting factor on industries. Social pressures are also important. We are speaking about social pressures that are exerted on industries to make a change because society is impacted by environmental impacts that have been externalized by industrial activities. So we will go right in. I will ask you to bear with me over the next few slides. They're quite text intensive and table intensive. So first, I just wanted, I'm going to, it's a very complex topic. We're dealing with 3 countries, 5 drivers, and 2 topics. So I've tried to put it all together in a coherent, progress in my presentation. So when we speak about policy, institutions, and legislation, one can argue quite easily that South Africa is the most advanced in all measures taken. Those include policies, legislative command and control mechanisms, such as legislation that governs water use and wastewater discharge, as well as waste disposal and the use of resources, the responsible use of resources. Namibia would be next, and then followed by Botswana. In Botswana, there's a lot going on at the moment with international development banks financing. The World Bank is currently financing the overhaul of relevant environmental legislation, so we do expect a change there in future. And the focus in Botswana very much is on water reuse, because Botswana has a severe problem with access to water resources, but we will touch on that later. The institutions giving effect to policies and legislation in all 3 countries have a weak to moderate influence on effecting change in industry, and that has to do with the lack of capacity, that being funding as well as skills in the governmental sector. So, you know, it's all good and well to have all these beautiful legislations, for example, in South Africa, but if we are not able to implement them, they do not take effect. So we are still struggling with that in all 3 countries and are hoping for an improvement in future. What's important perhaps as a highlight with regards to waste is the legislation on extended producer responsibility. South Africa leads the way. Recently, South Africa has implemented a piece of legislation that requires industries in the electrical sector, lighting, electronics, paper and packaging, as well as selected single-use products are required to contribute towards an extended producer responsibility scheme, which is an expense that most likely then will also affect the consumer in the end. But for now, the onus is on the industries to become more responsible with regards to the resources used in making their products. In Namibia, there are currently no concrete plans. There are some policies underway for the packaging sector. And in Botswana, as the industry is not yet very diversified, the view is to implement those once the manufacturing sector has established and diversified. With regards to infrastructure development in water and wastewater, those aspects, even though they're not industry related per se, they are important factors in determining whether industry needs to provide for themselves with regards to the infrastructure, whether they are able to use those infrastructures, and so it determines where industry establishes. So generally speaking, South Africa and Namibia are relatively well developed. In South Africa, most definitely well developed, but definitely infrastructures need modernization and maintenance to maximize the potential to support industrial activities. Right, so now we are looking at the key driver economics, and I have separated them this time for water and waste. I think it deserves a separate slide. So the key points, perhaps the takeaways, are that generally speaking, internationally, it is agreed that wastewater charges are the most effective tool to drive improved water management in industry. Water prices are less effective often, and that has to do with the fact that the nature of the commodity water, which is considered a human right. And so in times of extreme water scarcity, water prices are unlikely to increase in proportion to reflect the scarcity of water. This means that water prices are unlikely to ever be a really important determining factor in improving water management. However, water scarcity, which falls under the environmental driver, which we'll speak about a bit later, is likely to be the most important driver for industries to make a change. Wastewater reuse certainly seems to be more lucrative when it is provided as a source to industry rather than when it is supplied to agriculture. So there are opportunities for cross-sectoral wastewater trading in Southern Africa. So 3 aspects that are important when it comes to economics and whether it becomes economically viable for industries to make a change, trends in water prices in South Africa, and Namibia, Botswana, they are all increasing above inflation rates. So even though they are obviously important factors, I don't want to dismiss it as a factor, it is still important. It ranges widely in Namibia and South Africa from 25 Rand all the way to 64 Rand per cubic meter. And the prices are very different depending on which region of the country you're looking at. There is much more detail in the reports. So if you are interested to see how different municipalities are taking on this challenge, you can have a look in the study. In Botswana, there's a huge mismatch between the availability of water resources and the demand centers. And so Botswana is known as one of the most expensive when it comes to water prices. So in Botswana, perhaps arguably, it is a very important driving force at this point in time. Water and wastewater reuse in most metropolitan areas in Southern Africa, well, in South Africa, and also in some in Namibia, wastewater reuse is an important component of providing water to industries. I think Namibia is quite famous actually for their potable reuse plant. So that is slightly different. It takes it to another level, but water reuse certainly is an important topic in Namibia. In Botswana, even though not much is practiced at this time, the Botswanan government intends to recycle 96% of their water by the year 2030. So big goals in Botswana, a big drive to try and use the water resources that are available. Trends in wastewater charges, so that is the important, according to key point 1, is an important point. So surcharges are applicable everywhere in South Africa, in all the municipalities, all the major municipalities. And again, there is more detail in the study, a table that actually provides the ranges of prices and the way that municipalities are taking on setting up a charging system. So you can have a look in the study. And but generally speaking, we need to say that the driver is still relatively weak because charges probably don't usually reflect the amount of pollution that is caused. So the polluter pays principle it's being attempted to be used, but it's not being used to its full potential at this point. So we would rate that as a currently weak to moderate driver in South Africa. When we speak about economics and waste, it is a little bit less number crunching. There's not as much data available as for the water topic. So perhaps what needs to be said at the beginning is that landfilling is still the main mechanism in all 3 countries. And in South Africa, there's the most data available. And there it was estimated that we lost value to landfill in South Africa in 2017, a whopping 17 billion Rand. And that is a huge amount of money that's lost, potentially lost to landfill, that we can try, and if we have the right framework conditions, to try and make use of. South Africa's waste management industry is currently worth around about 25.3 billion Rand, which translates to 1.4 billion euros for the German-speaking audience. There are few economic tools that have been implemented to incentivize industry to produce less waste. For example, across all 3 countries, waste disposal fees are currently not high enough to effect change. However, as government infrastructure is upgraded, and as we mentioned earlier, there is a need to upgrade the infrastructure, we will expect that costs will increase. Potential future changes include higher landfill disposal costs, landfill tax, tax credits, rebates for using recycled materials, and then an important one, which is the replacement of a virgin material subsidy with virgin material tax. So those are the expectations that we can have towards the 3 countries in the region. With regards to the role of extended producer responsibility, as mentioned before, it's gaining traction in South Africa, and we can expect Namibia to follow suit relatively soon. And with Botswana, we'll probably have to wait in the medium to long term for that to take effect. In all 3 countries, industries usually appoint waste management companies to dispose of the industrial waste. An interesting fact here that should be a takeaway is that in Namibia, we have very large distances between, we have a low population density, large distances between waste management facilities and waste producers. So transporting costs are huge, and so do incur a greater cost to industries wanting to dispose of their waste. Also, it is notable that at the moment there are only 2 hazardous waste disposal sites, and those are in Windhoek and Walvis Bay, and will determine where industry intends to settle. Environmental and social points. Important is most definitely with regards to the social impact or the social driver that industrial companies are more and more expected to become socially and environmentally responsible. So the key word is here environmental, social, and corporate governance, and companies are investing in for branding purposes because customers do expect it more and more. In terms of waste, the environmental factor is probably less important than for water, where the water scarcity aspect is the key driving force. While we are running out of landfill sites, the only real leverage that we would have for industries to become better are our economic and legislative and social pressures. The environmental pressure doesn't really right now directly affect industries. So with regards to the social impacts, where then the social pressure would also come from is that poor waste management disproportionately affects poor and marginalized communities, and arguably the most vulnerable group is the informal waste sector, which consists of waste pickers who work on landfill sites and collect recyclables door to door and are therefore vulnerable to health and safety hazards. Those groups need to be considered very carefully when transitioning towards extended producer responsibility schemes. With regards to water, we already said water scarcity is an important driver, and industry is also in competition with other water users, and that puts pressure on industries to become more water efficient and also to pollute less. Direct potable reuse schemes are going to become more important in future and are already important in Namibia, and there is a strong drive in Botswana, as mentioned earlier. So the pre-treatment of industrial effluent will become more and more important, and the public eye will be on the performance of industries to comply with standards. Now I have given you a lot of text and a lot of tables, and I thought I'd just wrap it up by giving you a bit of a visual view of the situation that I've just described. You can see the green bubbles, now we're talking about waste, and the green dark bubbles are an estimation. Please don't hold me to it. These are really just a qualitative depiction of how we see the situation. So the dark green bubbles are what we are seeing currently, and the green bubbles are essentially the potential of these drivers to drive a change in the adoption of environmental technologies. So as you can see, the first important thing to note is that there is the biggest room for improvement is in Botswana, followed by Namibia. And then the least that can still be achieved is in South Africa. Then notably with regards to the legislation and policy institutional structures, I'm not going to go into detail again. I'm sure you still remember. There are a couple of changes that need to be made, and also the institutional structures to actually implement these laws is important in all three countries. With regards to the economics, you can see the bubble for the potential bubble for Botswana is slightly lower, and we figured that that could be justified by saying that, you know, extended producer responsibility is still a fair bit far away. So just to give you an idea what the thought process was behind coming up with this graphic. With regards to water, you can see the setup is slightly different. We have, in this case, we have 5 bubbles. In the waste summary, we put social and environmental together. In water, we have environmental as a key driver, and you can see that the potential bubble, and we expect that to worsen in all 3 countries, that is going to be the biggest driver for a change in industry. Industry needs water for many, many processes, manufacturing and other processes. So that will be the key driver in Southern Africa as we experience the effects of climate change and urbanization. With regards to legislation, again, you can see overall that the greatest improvements still in policy and legislation aspects are to be achieved in Botswana, less so in Namibia, and least in South Africa. With regards to the economics, the bubble in Botswana is slightly bigger because, as you perhaps remember, I mentioned how expensive water is currently there. Just as an example, I think it was in 2016, a slaughterhouse, a slaughter company, and a textile company, they paid between 1 and 2 million rand per year for their water use. So you can see how expensive the water is there. And so, yes, that deserves a little bit of a bigger bubble here. Right, so with regards to concluding remarks, we would conclude that opportunities most certainly exist in Southern Africa, but the exact market volume currently is not known. We would probably identify, also with the help of speaking to experts, that agri-processing, energy production, mining, metal processing and manufacturing, plastic manufacturing, manufacturing of construction materials, chemicals, manufacturing, and the automotive industry, that these are key industries that will see a shift in becoming more resource efficient. The role of environmental technologies is, of course, key in this transitioning phase. And we have, I would just like to give a couple of examples. For example, in waste management, industries could implement and have already been implementing machinery that makes production processes more efficient. So the input materials required are lowered. In other cases, machinery can be implemented to make use of recycled materials, and that allows the reduction of virgin materials for the production of the goods. For all of that, we do need technology, and that will be an important consideration to make when we look at a business case of whether a project can be implemented in industry or not. If we're looking at water, probably the most obvious examples would be to look at water efficiency within a facility to see if perhaps water is lost to leakages. You can implement technologies to detect leakages, as well as to detect leakages early, for example, and to fix them. You could implement technologies that improve the use efficiency of water, as well as when you look at wastewater, we can look at the reuse of water either for other purposes, so recycle it, downcycle it, use it for other processes that don't need potable water, or we can even look at, in an extreme situation such as Botswana, for example, if you have an industry there where it is too difficult to dig deep and get the borehole water, from 200 meters down. If that is too expensive, it might be better to look at retreating your water in your facility and retreating it to the quality that you need it to be so that you can continue with your operations. So these are the sort of types of technologies that a sustainability expert in going into a facility would look at, but I'm not going to take away from the presentation that Alf is going to give in a moment, and would like to conclude by saying that these key driving forces, we are on our way in Southern Africa, but as you remember from the two last slides, that there is definitely scope for improvement, and we hope that the path towards transitioning towards resource efficiency in industry will be continued the way it is going at the moment, and that the uptake of technology is going to be increased. The business case for the uptake of technology is of course important, and that will be dependent on the industry type as well as their location. Ooh, sorry, I think I will conclude with that. Thank you very much for listening, and you can always email me. My email address is here. I'll post it into the chat in a moment as well. If you have any further questions or comments, I'm very happy to engage. And please also ask questions now. We will be taking questions in the chat. Thank you very much.
Vera, thank you very much. And indeed, there have been questions or comments raised in the chat by Michelle and Margaret. Thank you very much for that. I think they're both addressed to Vera, so I give Vera a few seconds to take a look at the chat, but I also kind of read it out. Michelle asked, or I see it rather as a comment, how these standards on industry are actually going to be enforced in a situation where municipalities are not able to provide safe and reliable drinking water. So Vera, I'm seeing if you can say a few words about that, because I think we see a change there, enforcement particular to the private sector rather than on the municipal side. And Margaret asked about if there's any further information regarding the commercial level of recycling, in particular in Botswana. And I think you raised a valuable point there, Margaret. It's about, the sufficient amount of waste for some of the activities like recycling. Vera, are you able to say a few words on that?
Okay, sorry.
Maybe speak first about the enforcement of standards.
Yes, it's a very good question. I think that relates back to the currently so relatively weak institutional structure that we have in all three countries. And it is a big problem. I mean, we have in South Africa, we lack the money essentially to continuously monitor, and monitoring of water and wastewater quality in municipalities is the critical component to actually then enforce the legislation. But monitoring costs money, and monitoring requires skills and people to do the job, and very often this capacity is simply currently not available. With regards to how this is going to be enforced, I think the way that it would be enforced is by engaging in training, as far as I understand. With regards to the city of Cape Town, recently the German Development Bank, the KfW, provided a hefty grant to Cape Town, if I remember, 4.6 million euros, if I remember correctly. And that will go towards training as well, and towards capacity building, as far as I understand, to build the institutional capacity. So now that is Cape Town, but we obviously have the same issues in all the other municipalities. So yes, training, capacity building, and money. Also, another perhaps what is important in achieving this is one of our weaknesses, not only in South Africa, but also in the other countries, is to collect charges, the water charges. The actual money needs to be collected. And if the revenue is not collected, we can't put the revenue to maintain infrastructure, but also to invest into our capacity and into enforcement. So there is change on the horizon. I do elaborate on this aspect in the study as well. But yes, revenue collection is a big topic in the municipal sector. I'm not sure. I hope this answers your question. Perhaps we should move on to the next one. What is the state of play commercial recycling of waste in all three countries? In Botswana, there's not enough waste produced to be profitable. State of play. Okay, so if I understand this correctly, this question would refer to, how far along are we in terms of recycling in these three countries. Botswana, yes, there isn't enough waste, but I think also what the problem is in Botswana is that the prices that can be fetched for the recyclable materials is extremely low. So that also makes for a difficult market environment to actually make use of recycled materials. So waste pickers get paid very little, and I think that's also the same for South Africa and Namibia per kilo, because currently the recycled material cannot compete with virgin materials, which also links back again to the fact that currently virgin materials are subsidized, which should actually turn into being taxed. Which is obviously a difficult field to navigate, because if you start taxing virgin materials and industries are not ready to transition yet to using recycled material, then you might have a problem with products going onto the market. So this is a very delicate balance that needs to be struck. And I think in Botswana, I think you're right in saying that, that there is very little waste. And in Botswana also what the problem is that they are exporting most of their waste. So does Namibia. All the recyclable waste gets exported, or a lot of it gets exported to South Africa actually from Namibia, and from Botswana as well, because they don't have the facilities within the country to do the recycling themselves or to produce products from the recyclable materials, which also means that Botswana and Namibia are not really maximizing, are not able at the moment to maximize on the economy of recyclables. I hope that answers the question. The next question is, does German law require companies in South Africa to support local, local recycling initiatives, specifically the recycling of lithium-ion batteries by the automotive companies? Very interesting question. I would probably say that the German law wouldn't extend to South African local recycling initiatives. However, we do have international agreements, and we have we have sustainability goals for German companies operating in foreign countries. So I would imagine that that would be that German companies would then, as all the other companies as well, do this through their channels of corporate social responsibilities, and then also through the extended producer responsibility schemes, if we speak about South Africa. I think also what might be interesting to say is that recently, talking about the legislation in South Africa being fairly strong already, what has been recently promulgated is the ban of batteries on landfill sites. So this is an interesting topic for the automotive companies. So just to throw that in there as well. I hope I answered your question adequately. Unless, Jens, do you have anything to add to this?
Vera, you mentioned quite well that that in general the German law doesn't extend to South Africa, but we see it in particular, and also I must admit that the South African law, when it comes to battery storage, particularly in this question of battery storage, isn't that well developed at the moment. and hasn't reached out to the status of the question of recycling. I think that's also due to the fact that this battery market is just in a, let's say, in a ramp up or in a startup phase in South Africa. What Vera mentioned, and it's quite well, you know, that we see not necessarily from a government perspective, so from a public sector, legislative wise and regulatory wise, issued terms for handling more sustainable, but we rather see in international companies or companies being internationally active. And that's not only restricted to German companies, that there is a drive towards sustainability within the full supply chain of the business, and irrespectively of the area they are active. So international companies start to streamline this throughout the supply chains, through their various subsidiaries in countries, and also often then doing this also, this applies to their suppliers. So we see this in particular in the automotive sector, and it started quite heavily with, for instance, with renewable energies and carbon emission targets, that all of a sudden suppliers to larger car manufacturers are confronted with CO2 reduction targets. And this also comes now into the field also of water and other resources, as this completely been streamlined in the supply chain. So to wrap up the question, there's no legal obligation, so no extension of German law within South Africa, but voluntary activities by companies within their sustainability programs. I hope that extends the question a bit, and then there are more comments. For the sake of time, we have to move on. Also, an interesting comment from Yame regarding the Botswana leg of the African Circular Economy Network. Thanks for reaching out. We will take a look at your comment and get back to you. Also, Vino, your question is not forgotten. We're going to have a look in the aftermath of the function and tend to all of your questions, because now I would like, for the sake of time, to go to our next presenter, to Alf, who now gives a bit more, let's say, put some flesh to the framework conditions that Vera has lined out, and give some examples how industry has become active, not only aware, but active in the field of resource efficiency, and what was their activities and their benefits. So please, Alf, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jens, and thank you very much, Vera, and a special thanks to the German Chamber for this opportunity. It is clear, if I look at some of the composition of the participants, and I look at the results of the poll, that in some way we may be preaching to the converted. But nevertheless, I think there's still a lot of opportunity in South Africa, and I will move forward on that basis. My presentation will essentially cover 4 key areas. We will look at some of the resource efficiency risks and benefits, and how that relates to industry in particular in each of these 3 countries. I will share 3 published case studies. We will look at a biogas plant, we will consider a dairy, and we will also look at a beverage company in South Africa. We will then move forward and speak somewhat and outline and explain and describe the approach and methodology of resource efficiency, how that has evolved since the turn of the century. And I will end that, although this extends beyond the mandate of the project, we will look at implementation of resource efficiency measures, how to bed them down, institutionalize them, and sustain the value that we gain through those. And I think by way of introduction, and maybe just sketching some context, it's important to consider that as the economy of the country develops and diversifies, there are significant shifts in water demand over periods of time. And water can both catalyze or constrain growth. And this came into very sharp focus with the recent droughts, and still the current drought experienced by both the Western Cape and Eastern Cape provinces, and also the threat to water security in KwaZulu-Natal. And it's not a coincidence that those provincial and those metropolitan areas just listed are all coastal areas. In the South African context, considerable spatial variability in water availability, compounded by frequent droughts and floods, combined with the threats of climate change, demand that water be managed with increasing levels of effectiveness. And there's a responsibility of industry to do that for their own survival in many ways. It is estimated, a recent study by the CSR has indicated that there's a potential that up to 27.5% of water saving is possible in current industrial and agricultural sector consumption levels. So quite significant.
Alf, can I ask, are the slides moving?
Yes, I dwelt on that as an opening slide, so it's moving.
Okay, okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. We will now look at and address some of the resource efficiency risks and benefits, just to sketch some context. Water security is a business risk, and in many cases bigger than energy. And while that may raise some eyebrows, we will deal with some of those elements. Water is a strategic asset which is purchased and in many cases used and discarded. Yes, in some cases it is included in the end product, but largely used and discarded. What we are seeing, and what is sadly true in many municipalities, and this changes and varies quite significantly across the South African municipal landscape, is that there's a crumbling water infrastructure. And as a consequence, we see water shedding becoming a reality in a growing number of municipalities in South Africa. Water quality of municipalities is also becoming increasingly unreliable, and it impacts on the business success, the business survival, and in many cases, the market share that many businesses protect and have. Water costs are increasing faster than energy costs. Now, as I said earlier, you may raise an eyebrow, but that is true. If you consider the 24-year period from 1996 to 2020, the average municipal water cost increased by 1,270%, about 5 times GDP, compared to the electricity tariff increase over the same period of 1,120%. So 1,300% compared to 1,100%. And it shows that we should be paying a lot more attention to how water is used, managed, and preserved. Driving this water security is also the growing risk of penalties and fines for non-compliance. So the focus on water really needs to grow in terms of addressing all of these security risks that we've identified. But let's talk about the benefits. Let's address some of the benefits that resource efficiency can bring to bear within industry and within industrial plants. In terms of financial benefits, there are a whole range of them, from raw material cost savings as a result of reduced wastage of raw materials and input sources, reduced disposal costs, cost savings on end of pipe treatment and remediation costs, reduced risks and legal liability due to reduced waste produced to waste levels, additional income streams due to new market opportunities that potential new market opportunities that are developed, reduced transportation costs for waste materials. There are also benefits in terms of environmental and health benefits, and these are very well documented and speak to improved working conditions within plants as a result of the environmental improvement, improved environmental performance of the plants, and greater visibility, complementing in many ways and in many instances both national and international trade, improved compliance with local, provincial, and national laws and policies, reduce waste and effluent waste streams. In terms of the technical and compliance benefits, these are quite broad, and they cover, amongst others, improved operating efficiencies within plants. And what we have witnessed in some instances related to those improved efficiencies and greater plant and equipment reliability is better production quality and consistency. A proven link between productivity and cleaner production has clearly been established, and we've seen that over many years of the work done by the National Cleaner Production Center of South Africa. It enables also a proactive approach in terms of legislation. And what we have seen as the result is an improvement in relationships with authorities, whether these are local, provincial, or national, in terms of the relationship between the company and the authority. And introducing cleaner technologies and improving housekeeping also decreases reputational liability risks. We've seen this in many of the dirty industries, like amongst others, textiles, footwear, leather and clothing. And then the continuous improvement of ISO 14001 and other environmental management standards. So technical and compliance benefits are quite broad. Touching on and moving on, and not forgetting about the social benefits. Better social acceptance and less conflict with non-government organizations, for example. It also presents an excellent opportunity to implement resource efficiency as part of the company's CSR program. Resource efficiency can form part of a very broader public marketing strategy to elevate visibility and also to increase market share or access to market share. It can also serve to improve recruitment and staff retention, a very important element within most businesses today. And another social benefit is the lower pollution levels that result in better quality of life for the employees, the people, the community, and the clients. So a range of resource efficiency benefits. And when we look at this and we expand on this, the question is, so why are we not responding? Or why are we not seeing a more urgent and necessary response to these? And in partially addressing that question, I will now touch on the case studies that we have developed and how through these case studies we can demonstrate the response of some companies to those and in addressing not only the opportunities, but some of the challenges that came about through regulation changes. And the first one that I'm going to look at is Morgan Beef. Morgan Beef is an abattoir, and I think the need for change came about when there was a change in terms of disposal of the slaughter waste by the introduction of a bylaw that forbid them to dumping animal waste at landfill sites, and that affected all abattoirs, poultry, red meat, and other abattoirs. And a consideration was anaerobic digestion as a way in which they could manage their waste in a legally compliant and environmentally sustainable way. And over and above that, that need was the added benefit that they could generate energy in the process that could be utilized within the plant. And in defining some of the main objectives in establishing this response to that waste management need was to design and construct and commission a 400 or 440 kilowatt biogas plant to utilize the slaughter waste of 300 cattle a day, 5 days a week. And the design included in the initial designing and planning stage, the accommodation of feedstock preparation. It had to accommodate that and address that. A digester plant that included all the mechanical and electrical auxiliaries necessary to operate it successfully. And a cogeneration plant with the benefits of electricity generation as well as the thermal and heating opportunity for both local and external needs. And then to develop a manner in which digestate could be managed effectively. And that was part of the brief in terms of designing this plant. And some of the key elements in this plant design included a standard continuous third tank reactor with a lot of external mounted gas mixing equipment and heating through external heat exchangers, which by that design significantly reduced the complexity and cost of maintenance because those were mounted externally. As required, a pasteurizer to comply with legislation that required all hazardous material to be pasteurized for an hour at 70 degrees Celsius, and a mixing tank was included where all the different waste streams from the abattoir would first be collected and mixed in order to ensure a homogeneous slurry into the digester. In addition to the mixing tank, a second tank was commissioned to store the daily production of digestate for a maximum of 5 days before it was removed from site by a tanker truck and transported to an agricultural land for disposal. And what was interesting is that second tank had a gas dome so that we could squeeze out and capture the last little bit of gas produced in the process before transportation and disposal. And equally interesting was the commissioning, the development, and the installation of a desulfurizing unit, a locally developed desulfurizing unit to ensure the removal of hydrogen sulfide. To show you some of the images around that, and here, based purely on the opportunity of a cost and speed of construction, the digester was a precast post-tension concrete digester. That was the cogeneration plant that they had developed, and this was the gas mixing and external heat exchangers, the external auxiliaries that enabled maintenance, relatively easy maintenance to the digester. Some of the outcomes and the lessons learned is that we had seen about 8% of the electricity generated being consumed for heating of the anaerobic digester. And we'd see the biogas plant supplying 50% of the electricity requirements of the abattoir. Waste heat, water heating was replaced the coal-fired boiler that up until that point was used to provide hot water to the plant. This provided that waste management solution in terms of disposal of hazardous waste to landfill. Provided an IRR of 20.5% and a 7-year payback. And some of the lessons learned that was that the cost plus contract applied in this particular instance contributed to time and cost overruns at the end of the day. And with hindsight, an EPC would have been preferred. Important also in terms of lessons learned was the realization of the importance of appointing developer and contractors who have deep and extensive experience in biogas and the erection, installation, and commissioning of biogas plant to limit the risk. I'm going to move on now to the next case study, which is a case study of Hoodlands Dairy. For those who don't know about Hoodlands Dairy, it's a pretty large dairy. It's probably one of our largest in South Africa. It's based in the Eastern Cape, in Humansdorp in particular, employs more than 1,000 people. It's one of the largest manufacturers of UHT milk in South Africa, and they market that ultra high temperature milk under the brand First Choice. Now, they are a processor of farm fresh milk who produce and package high quality dairy products as well. And dairy farming methods should not only have a minimum impact on the environment, that was certainly the view that Woodlands Dairy took, but it should also be an animal friendly process and operation and intervention and boost public support for dairy farming at large, through that particularly community support. And in terms of the challenges faced, I will look at the effluent specifications initially, and that there was a feed rate of 1,500 cubic meters per day at a pH level of 12, and a total chemical oxygen demand of 10 grams per liter and a COD load of 15 ton per day. What Woodlands did is they contracted Neola Water Technologies to provide a viable processing solution for the growing process effluent stream. They were starting to ramp up production, and they were starting to see this growing stream that was being discharged to drain at that point. The facility contains milk sterilization and a packaging plant, as well as a cheese factory. And all the process effluent is sent to a combined effluent sump. And there was a need to look at another way to deal with that in the light of the anticipated growth within the plant. And I think in terms of what was happening globally in dairies as well, as the global demand for milk, cheese, yogurt, and other dairy products continues to grow, cost and energy management concerns are driving the introduction of new technologies in dairies to optimize and control cost of water usage. So we start to see that energy cost nexus, energy water nexus to revealing its hand again. And of the forces shaping the modernization of the dairy industry, water usage, energy cost, and recovery of lost products are the key drivers to change. And it's within the context of that understanding and what was happening globally that there was this objective to keep the cow water. And what is meant by that, they were looking at the recovery of condensate from evaporation of dairy products, or as they termed it, cow water, for reuse is becoming a growing market and the potential for a rapid return on investment. The benefits of condensate recovery using reverse osmosis systems can be twofold with savings in water consumption and its very high level water purity in many cases, as well as waste heat recovery potential. So in terms of the achievements and the results that occurred and the actions taken, some of the key figures to share with you: the high COD loading of about 15 ton COD per day, growing effluent demand and anticipated growth with growth in the dairy operation, the existence of long chain organics in the effluent, and achieving the need to achieve a plant effluent concentration within and well below the local municipal standards. And also the objective of recovering more than 95% of that. So Veolia Technologies proposed a resource recovery plant, RPP, capable of processing 1.5 million liters per day, and which could be upgraded to 2 million liters per day at a later stage. The resource recovery plant will make use of bioethane state-of-the-art methane technology capable of removing more than 95% of effluent COD. A piloting study was performed to provide effluent-specific treatment facility and ensuring the production performance and client satisfaction. And I imagine over time, with the work that is being done by many programs in South Africa, that the benchmarking and sharing that occurs within the dairy sector will see that kind of technology replicated in other areas. My final case study is on amalgamated beverage industries. Is on the largest producer of Coca-Cola in South Africa. They're the leading soft drink business in the AB InBev stable, and they are a non-alcoholic beverage company responsible for and accounting for about 60% of Coca-Cola sales in South Africa and operating out of 5 manufacturing plants across South Africa. This makes ABI one of the largest producers and distributors of Coca-Cola brands in the Southern Hemisphere. The ABI Premier Place, which is the site that we are going to talk about now, is approximately 20 years old, so it's not a new plant and functions mainly as a returnable glass bottling beverage facility. The company has been on an aggressive water savings drive, which had seen its specific water consumption drop from 5.5 liters of water per liter of beverage in 2011 to 2.3 liters in 2013. So they were on the road and they were aware of the need to do things to improve the change. And one of the savings interventions over this period was the installation of a reclaim tank to recover the backwash and the reject water in the water treatment systems, which up until that point was simply discharged to drain. This water was to be used on non-product surface cleaning and applications like, for example, crate washing, lubrication systems, and manual cleaning. And during the initial investigation, it was established that the recovered water would be sufficient to meet plant water demand from the recovery tanks, and that was the basis on which this project then continued. However, they had to install a meter at the municipal makeup line, as it was found that one of the recovered water volume in the reclaimed tank was in fact higher than the metered supply from the municipality, and that was due to a faulty municipal control valve, which saw municipal water bleeding into recovered water flows. With that discovery, and this arises from monitoring and metering, and effective monitoring and metering, and with this discovery that was erected. So we see the reclaimed tank on the right-hand side of this image on the top right of the slide. And we look at some of we talk to the solution that was ultimately implemented at ABI. The faulty valve was repaired and additional water from the cleaning in place systems was also recovered. And after the invention, no further municipal makeup water was required for the recovery tanks at all. So all cleaning and washing of crates, lubrication, and other non-product contact cleaning was now done with recycled water. A program was implemented to improve water use efficiency of recovered water to ensure that no additional municipal water was required for non-product cleaning. The numbers that resulted from this intervention is that over the first 3 months following the implementation of this project, there was an actual savings of water, an actual metered savings of water of 7,000 kiloliters, based at the same production and output levels. So what are some of the lessons learned? Initially, all of the rinse water was recovered, resulting in contamination of the reclaimed tank. And that was subsequently altered in order to reject the first 15% of rinse water. And I imagine with a later upgrade of that technology, a very strategically located strainer or filter unit can address that and even capture that 50% being discharged. An ongoing leak management program was implemented to ensure that losses are more effectively tracked, tagged, managed, and controlled. And the fact that it's continuous is an indication that you cannot take your eye off the ball. Leaks occur or leaks spring and continue to spring everywhere. So keeping, not only in terms of water, but in terms of steam in some steam systems as well. In terms of next steps, ABI recycled the backwash water from the water treatment and bottle washer softening plants and saved 8% of that consumption. They installed a lubricant recovery system to reduce the lubricant usage and COD concentration levels in the effluent. And they repaired the effluent pH correction system. And quite often, if I go back to that first bullet point on next steps, we see that through a cycle of washes, the final washes are relatively clean and discharged. And what they are doing, which we have done quite successfully in many other organizations, is we've taken the final rinse water and recycled that as the first rinse water in the next cycle, and in that way reduced water consumption too. So moving on from those case studies and having a very high level look at the approach and methodology applied in the resource efficiency projects, resource efficiency assessments and scoping, and resource efficiency implementation. Now, the methodology for resource efficiency assessments have been around and pretty entrenched since the turn of the century. But with the evolution of the environmental management systems, the energy management systems, and whole family of those, and other management systems, we have seen the approach and methodology start to change somewhat. So effectively, the key activities within an assessment methodology will be defining the need for and establishing the urgency and the commitment from plant management to indeed understand the importance of it and to support the initiatives. Then typically what would happen at that early stage would be a cost risk benefit analysis to determine whether the opportunities and the potential benefits from engaging in the plant will certainly outweigh the cost in unearthing those opportunities. It's important as a next step to understand what happens in the plant and to track and trace not only the water and material flows, but also the waste streams emanating from those. So a very detailed understanding of the process within the plant, but also the water and material flows is conducted. A walkthrough audit, where during that walkthrough audit, quite critically, observations of processes, observations of good practices, observations of poor practices are noted and captured. And then through that is the analysis of materials, energy and water balances, looking at current and past consumption of water and material, developing consumption baselines, water consumption baselines, material consumption baselines, identifying what the indicators are, whether those performances in water and material consumption is improving or not. Starting to develop some options, analyzing those options in terms of its technical, environmental, and financial feasibility. And then once that is done, is to present those, prioritize them, and beyond the mandate of this project, is to commence implementation of those projects. And then that's not good enough. We need to know whether we in fact achieved what we set out to achieve. So beyond the implementation phase and in a manner to sustain what has been done and what has been started is ongoing monitoring and evaluation and continuing that plan, do, check, act cycle, so fundamental to many of the ISO standards. Very important and it's a very critical step that we take within many of the plants we work with, is the need to conduct a self-assessment. It's to get management or to have a person do that. And this is a qualitative assessment of how well you think you're doing. And in this particular case, we were evaluating ourselves on 9 parameters, from operator awareness to waste management to water use. And you can choose what you want to, and you can then do the self-assessment and continue to do this at regular intervals to track through this qualitative information and feedback, to track the perceived improvement or otherwise in terms of resource efficiency in your plant. And it's quite a valuable tool in establishing where the weaknesses or perceived weaknesses in a plant are, and where the operation thinks they're doing pretty nicely and pretty well. Now, I referred to this material flow chart earlier and the importance of it, and it's been fundamental to resource efficiency assessment since before the turn of the century, and it is still a very effective way of understanding it. And in many instances, the sheer development of this material and flow chart highlights opportunities that otherwise would not be observed or noticed, or plant management may not even be aware of them. So what we would typically do is, besides the actual process, and this is a very simple process in a raw fish operation, is we look at all the raw material flows through the process. What happens with the waste streams from each of those? We also look at all the water flows, where required in each of these stages and process steps, and what happens with the effluent when it leaves. And developing this material and flow chart in many cases can be quite eye-opening and highly informative. And the purpose of that, at the end of the day, is very similar to what happens in the planning stage of the plan, do, check methodology, is to develop and prioritize action plans. And there are many very neat ways of doing this. You could do this looking at the Micrographics bubble application, where you plot cost of intervention against impact of intervention. You could use this particular one. There are many other ways of doing this, but in this particular one, we look at evaluating the relative impact of implementation cost, savings potential, environmental impact, and difficulty factor on each of the measures identified. And in that way, prioritizing what needs to be done now, what needs to be addressed first, and in that way guide a more deeper dive and a more deeper detailed assessment into that particular area. And that's how we are guided. And these focus areas are normally discussed with and agreed with plant management. Implementation of resource efficiency measures. I think we appreciate that water security is complex. It requires money. It requires money that in many cases may be diverted from investments from other revenue drivers. It requires expertise, which in many companies is not a core competence. I go into many companies and I can ask for the energy manager, and typically an electrical engineer will come and present himself to me. But if I go into an organization and ask to meet the water champion, the water manager, there's hardly anybody that can put their hand up and address that need. And that in many ways addresses and leads to and is a cause of the problems of the lack of focus we see in terms of water use efficiency. Sustainable water security is not an overnight thing. It's a marathon and not a sprint. And you need to have the patience and the determination to see it through. And the risk of failure can be high because of the complex steps ranging from design, installation, operation, and maintenance. And we need to just weigh up the product and technology driven focus, because technology has become quite a nice new sexy way to resolve problems, so many of us think, against a more serious water security focus and a more sustainable long-term view, as is also reconciling operational cost versus the strategic benefit of it. And a lot of that would be conducted within that cost risk benefit analysis that I referred to earlier. And understanding the commercials and the impact and value of the transactional, immediate short-term need versus a long-term accountability-based relationship. So water security has to navigate all of these complex issues. How do we implement resource efficiency projects? A step at a time. and in a systematic manner. We don't jump any of those key steps that I shared with you in an earlier slide. And you don't stop doing it after the first cycle. You continue doing it. You continue following that plan, do, check, act cycle. You integrate the interests of the business and the protection of the environment and the needs for water, material, resource efficiency, so that it doesn't become a siloed approach, but it becomes part of company culture. And we learn by doing it. And within the organization, there's a lot of learning. And even in my own role, I learn a lot too. And it's not necessarily through actions which require huge investments. It's through, at times, no low-cost investments that requires nothing. Behavior change, changing the way you are currently doing things. And with some out-of-the-box thinking and teamwork. It's not a one-man crusade. And very typically in many plants, we encounter a lot of pushback and a lot of resistance. And they range through a whole range of very innovative and very, very interesting barriers. From, we have always worked like this, and it's always worked with this company in the last 20, 100 years. Why should we change? Nobody told me to do anything. It's not my business, and I'm very busy right now. I don't have the time to do it. Or I forgot to let Alf do it, you know? Well, it's too early to do this. We'll do it next year. We haven't budgeted it for this year. Every day, every week, every month that goes by with you doing nothing about conserving and improving your water use efficiency and your material efficiencies represents a huge lost opportunity. So in terms of the waste management hierarchy, there's a preferred way that we would want to certainly address these, and we want to do it in a very strategic manner. So reducing waste at the point of source, or elimination of waste at that point, is really the first and best option. So really it speaks to design a product. It speaks to how do we change the product design. Can it be changed? How do we change all the constituent components in that product so that we can reduce waste at the design? Because we remove all associated cost and environmental and achieve great environmental impact right there. Reducing the generation of waste at source is the next best option. And that's what we want to continue driving. Where reduction is not possible, we will certainly look at products and materials that can often be used as alternatives, resulting in significant cost savings. A wide variety of waste can be reprocessed and recycled, or used in products or composted, or made available again, or made available to other production streams within the plant or external operations. Recovery includes gaining energy from waste by incineration or other means, waste heat recovery. Landfill is the least desirable option, and really this is not where we want to see most of the waste go, as no value is gained from the waste produced in that way. So in terms of strategic focus, it will be looking at design of product, design of process, design of everything related to raw material and water use, and reducing it at the point of use. Some of the strategies that we employ within resource efficiency is we look at material substitution. So we will consider different use of it. Can we use waste from another process? And we've seen this happen. Well, I've seen cement plants, I have seen steel plants, I have seen pulp and paper plants, I've seen textile plants use waste as some of the constituent material in the raw and combine that with the virgin raw material they use. Is there a need for a technology change, an upgrade of plant and equipment? Are we looking at just better ways of managing that water consumption, even looking at ways of improving some of the machinery controls within the plant? Housekeeping is always important in that it separates work in progress from raw materials and finished products. And what that does, it at times, good housekeeping highlights opportunities. Is there a need to redesign this product? Can we make it differently? Would the market accommodate that need that could ultimately see us use less material and less water? And when we do have waste, which we are likely to have, can we minimize that? Can we recycle and reuse that? whether we do that internally or whether we recycle that in a symbiotic manner with other manufacturers that may want to use our waste as an input material for their production cycle. So implementing resource efficiency measures, and this is my last slide in just capping this, and this is beyond this, the mandate of the project, but it's important to look beyond the barriers of the project, look beyond the resource efficiency assessment, because there will be a need to implement. Some of those recommendations made would be compelling, and there would be an opportunity in terms of compliance, cost savings, and other benefits that may need and may force the hand of the company to implement, in which case we will need leadership commitment. This is no longer a middle management focus. This becomes an all-encompassing focus with the inclusion of leadership and top management. And where will we start? We will start with the no-cost measures. We want to prove and demonstrate the value of resource efficiency by showing how we can save water and materials without spending any money. And once we have exhausted those, we will look at the low-cost measures, the kind of measure that can be covered by OPEX and maintenance budgets. Things like leak maintenance, things like just general maintenance that can improve reliability of plant and equipment. We want to look whether within the maintenance budget it can cover some of that metering that we need within the plant. We will then look at behavior change. Behavior change, I term the silent salesman, because it's through behavior change that the significant people in the business, i.e. the operators that are operating a multi-million rand machine and discharging and controlling the use of huge volumes of water and raw material, is making sure that they understand the implications of their actions, not only in terms of operational efficiencies, but in terms of water use efficiency and raw material efficiency, and adapting and integrating that into the way they operate and manage and discharge their duties. And then once we've exhausted that, is to look at CapEx projects. Importance to raise awareness so that it's not only a small team, as we said, it's not a one-man crusade, it's the teamwork. So making sure that we spread this beyond just that team, and it's important to communicate. It's important to communicate internally, because it's through that communication that you buy a lot of support, that you buy a lot of commitment, and you get a lot of buy-in for what we are doing. In terms of once implementation is done, is institutionalizing it, making it part of the way the business operates. And that would mean a very strong focus on the significant water and material users. It's training the people that operate and run those processes, defining the standard operating procedures, documenting it, making that available and monitoring and using that, listing the critical operating parameters, defining the upper and lower limits to that, and also describing the action that need to occur when there's a significant deviation. Developing consumption baselines so that we have a reference to determine the impact of what we have implemented. Developing performance indicators and documenting and recording that, which is so important. And ultimately, as I said earlier in the earlier slide, is to continually evaluate and verify the impact of what we have done. And for that to happen, we need a performance indicator, a water and material performance indicator. We need to understand how to measure performance credibly and not in a misleading manner. We need to understand what drives water consumption in the plant, what drives raw material consumption in the plant. Because if you don't understand that, you will not be able to manage water performance and raw material performance. Getting understanding of the static factors, those that impact water and material consumption but don't vary routinely. Because you need to understand and monitor that, so that when there's a change, like an additional machine, additional production line, an extra shift, you need to adjust your consumption baseline. We need to look at interactive effects. What are the effects outside the scope of the project that impacts what we do within the project, and understand the measure of those. We then need to benchmark our performance within the group, within the sector, and maybe with nationally and beyond globally, to see how well or how poorly we're stacking up against other plants of the same type of process. And then it's an effective way of reporting so that you continue to sustain leadership commitment and buy-in. And these are the implementation resource measures that are critical in driving and demonstrating the value of resource efficiency. And with that, I thank you for your time.
Alf, thank you very, very much. I actually input with all your input, really, really interesting. But I in particular liked your slide on the barriers, and we also had a comment and some remarks on that. Again, just a quick note again, if you have like a direct question or comment to Alf's presentation, make use of the Q&A function at the very bottom of your screen. I think you spoke quite well, Alf, to a comment we received from Dion on the case studies and how we actually create a multiplier effect. And I guess maybe Alf, you can speak to that. I have the feeling that events like this today and the more you talk about benefits and things will start to get people moving, industries moving. Also, how to create the will within the company to initiate projects if they're not directly linked to the bottom line. Alf, can you maybe elaborate a little bit on your experience, how to initiate a change process in a company? Because I must say, like I said, the barriers that you mentioned, I think there's a lot of internal barriers behind the factory fence to engage in resource efficiency projects. It's not so much that like some external forces are normally holding companies back. I mean, it's a question of viability, but surely it's like a thing of like just start moving. Can you elaborate a little bit, Alf, on how to motivate companies and to start to engage?
Thank you. Yes, Jens, thank you. And Dion, thank you for that question. And it is a question we quite often faced. And I am privileged, Dion, to be in a position where I have led a national project in energy efficiency for 10 years. And to address your question directly, no single initiative, resource efficiency on its own, and the work of the BMU project, the German Chamber project, I think on its own will struggle to sustain and succeed if there's not the complementary support more broadly. Let me explain. So for this to work, it's important that we have a regulatory framework within South Africa, and whether that framework includes punitive measures and incentives to encourage companies to do it, and whether those punitive measures include higher landfill costs, gate fees, penalties for discharging excessive waste. And once we have that regulatory framework, we start to then see the focus of minds more strongly than we have in the past. Another very strong pillar in this would be to develop the standards. And we have the environmental management standard, ISO 14001. We have other standards that we could look at applying that will deal with these, and the accreditation of these standards and the visibility of those within the marketplace become an important driver of the work. And then there's training to upskill the plant practitioners and the graduates leaving university to enter this field, so that we have a common and broad approach to how we address the material and water use needs within industry. And finally, and to me probably more strongly, is that at the outset of the project that I referred to, that I managed for 10 years since 2010, when we started, Dion, we had a lot of European American examples and case studies. But as we started to develop South African demonstration plants and South African case studies, we found almost an acceleration of interest and acceleration of take-up and buy-in from same sector companies, or just generally South African companies more broadly, when they saw what was possible within the kind of regulatory and other constraints, economic and social constraints that they operate in as well. And when that is seen through the development of local demonstration plants and case studies, then we start to see a natural take-up. And within the project, and I have a few of my colleagues in this audience that can attest to that we have started to see a change where ultimately we were no longer knocking on doors, but industry was starting to knock on our doors. And I think that change will need to come about because of, can come about through the contribution of those 4 key components that I have measured and mentioned.
Thanks, Alf. Thanks. Alf, we moving a little bit away from the barriers and how to, how to start initiative and rather like, how to implement it. We had a quite interesting questions with regard to business models that might emerge within the sector of water or resource efficiency, and if there's something similar to expect, like in the field of energy, when we talk about ESCOs or share saving models, shared saving models, do you see anything moving in the market in this direction? Also, leasing could be an applicable tool for equipment. Is this too early, or how does the market move?
Thanks, Jens, and thanks, Wanathari. I think the water energy nexus is clearly starting to rear its head more and more prominently. And we are starting to see, and there's nothing that should stop us learning from what has happened in energy. And while energy focused the mind because it was almost immediate, the consequences of poor management or the consequences of poor maintenance were almost immediate. Plants came to a standstill and lights went off. With water, unfortunately, is not that way. And I sat in a workshop at the Western Cape government, where a colleague of mine within government bemoaned the fact that it won't be until taps run dry that people will realize that we have a problem. Because as long as they can turn the tap and water comes out, there's not a problem. And it was unlike electricity, where with the load shedding we had in energy and electricity, the results were immediate. So we find that whatever we can learn from other elements, and energy is one of them, we will certainly apply to developing a business model that is very comprehensive in its ability to address and sustain the resource efficiency improvements we want to see. Energy, as it happens, is one of the thematic areas within resource efficiency anyway. So capturing the learnings and developing those into a business model that addresses and can be quite adaptive in terms of the thematic area it works in and it's applied within, to me clearly is a realistic opportunity, and to my mind has already been developed in some quarters. It needs to be put to the test, it needs to be run to prove its worth. But I have no doubt, Wanathari, that there are business models and that we can fine-tune what is already there to make sure that we have a business model that addresses very effectively all the thematic areas within resource efficiency.
Thanks, Alf. Although I also expect that this might be a little bit more complicated than in the case of energy, because as you mentioned, Andy, the material flows, the water flows are quite different. But I guess the learnings of the ESCO business and the ESCO developments, not only in Southern Africa, but also like in other parts of the world, can be a good example and how to apply that. I think it all comes down also to a question of viability and the savings that can be achieved. And I guess that also speaks a little bit to the next question I want to address. And also the last question, taking at a look, is about a market outlook, which I guess is quite difficult maybe to give, but I think it depends all on viability questions. Would you be in a position, Alf, or would you look in the future? What do you think? What kind of growth can we expect? Also, maybe taking the lessons learned from the energy sector with regard to water and resource efficiency.
Yes, thank you, Jens, and thanks, Dion. It will be hard to put a number onto that, Dion. It is really, but if we look at what Vera shared, the potential 17 billion rands worth of potential in the waste that is deposited at landfill sites. If we look at the CSR's estimation of a 27.5% water saving potential, then just based on those two alone, I imagine that the growth in water and material saving projects over the next 10 years can be significant. And you know, Dion, it may not be our choice to do it at our leisure in the next 10 years. We may be forced by climatic conditions, by water scarcity, by higher tariffs to do so in the next 5 years. So I'm hoping that that is indeed the case, so that we can see a greater water stewardship. Thank you.
Thanks, Alf. Like I said, I think it's really, really difficult to put a number to that. Also, if you when you compare it to energy, and I think if you look like 10 or 12 years back, I think also a lot of people wouldn't have expected like an embedded generation market in South Africa, like jumping up to new heights every year, and having a dynamic growth that surpasses even the growth, actually the figures within the grid connected systems. So basically, there will be growth, and I think Alf, I take your answer as maybe moving into the closing remarks, also seeing that we're coming to the end of our time. And I think you put it quite nicely, Alf, now at the end. It might not be only a question of viability, but also a question of necessity. Vera said it earlier, you know, it's about, in particular in the field of water, it's also a question about availability and non-availability of a resource that can put a major risk on the operation of a company. And that should also be, you know, considered when you talk about barriers of implementation. And if it's viable, you know, it's always also having a risk perspective in view. What about not having a resource at hand, or having sudden shocks in the prices of resources? We saw, I think, with the presentation from Vera at the beginning, that there are certain push and pull factors within all the three countries, Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa, to a different extent. Maybe South Africa being the most progressed country within the legislative framework. And also, I think there was a valuable comment about how things are going to be enforced. There is a movement, or we see that non-compliance of tighter regulations is a risk factor to businesses. And that's maybe not only to the public sector side with non-compliance and any kind of fines, but it might also be, if you're part of a wider value chain, that your non-compliance with environmental legislation put you in a bad light within the value chain you're acting, or to your suppliers. There was another comment in the chat and the question and answers earlier about the potential obligation to exporting companies to Europe when Europe gonna tighten their environmental and social standards within the European market at the beginning, but then also, you know, set same targets, or let's say entry barriers to exporting companies from abroad, you know, to have a level playing field within the European market. So how do you mitigate that? Can be considered as push factors towards more resource efficient investments and compliance. On the other hand, I think, Alf, your case study showed that there's also certain pull factors, economic pull factors, and that investing in resource efficiency create economic benefits similar to the one as energy efficiency. And I'm also quite, you know, for me, mainly working in the field of energy, I find it quite interesting to see that in the relation that actually the water tariffs have been increasing more or stronger than electricity tariffs, because electricity is always completely in the limelight and everyone is talking about the next increase. But quite interesting to see that actually the increase in water was more hefty actually, and will at some stage also materialize in the bottom line of companies. So that also gives incentives to act. At the end, always said, I think it's a question, if companies do it, of viability, and the viability we also saw depends on the location and the type of resources you need. So I think there's also quite individual look at each company, and to take this look, you need knowledge, you need awareness, and you need to be informed about your the framework conditions of the market you act in. I think there are several programs running, and we hope that we, with our project and program, can contribute to share more information on these framework conditions and where activities for certain sectors can be beneficial to companies in general, and so that individual companies again are able to check if these kinds of measures are also applied to their businesses. Before thanking you all for your participation and interest today and sticking with us in the last 2 hours, I also want to highlight again what my colleague Vera said earlier. You're more than welcome to engage with us, to reach out to us. You can find us online. The project website is up and running. There are our contact details. The studies are there. There were some unanswered questions we're going to take care of in the aftermath of the study. We're going to distribute all the presentations. And again, you're more than welcome to contact us in case you have further comments, some questions, or maybe also just interested how to cooperate with the project within the next 10 to 12 months. With having said that, I would first of all like to thank Stephanie and Chris for the translation services. Thank you very much. Alf, Vera, thank you very much for your contribution. And of course, again, a special thanks to the German Federal Ministry of Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection to put the SA German Chamber in a position to actually get active in this quite crucial field of resource efficiency in industry in Southern Africa. I wish all of you a nice Thursday, a good Friday, and maybe outlook already a nice weekend. Thank you very much.